हमारे संवैधानिक ढांचों की चुनौतियों और उपलब्धियों का गहन विश्लेषण किया है। उनकी प्रभावशाली लेखनी में कमिटमेंट टू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कांग्रेस स्टाइल शामिल है, जिसमें उन्होंने लोकतंत्र के विभिन्न चरणों पर प्रकाश डाला है और संवैधानिक सिद्धांतों के महत्व को रेखांकित किया है। उनका एक और महत्वपूर्ण लेख स्ट्रेचिंग फॉर अ सेविंग हैंड पीएम मोदीज डिफेंस ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन हमारे लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों की रक्षा के महत्व पर केंद्रित है। लेखन के अलावा डॉक्टर गांगुली ने संवैधानिक विषयों पर प्रभावशाली भाषण भी दिए हैं, जिनमें अनुच्छेद 370 के ऐतिहासिक निरसन पर उनकी गहरी और विश्लेषणात्मक दृष्टि भारत की एकता और अखंडता के संदर्भ में अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण रही है। आज हमारे बीच उन्हें पाकर हम स्वयं को प्रफुल्लित महसूस कर रहे हैं। अब मैं डॉक्टर गांगुली से अनुरोध करती हूँ कि वे मंच पर आएं और अपने अमूल्य विचार हमारे साथ साझा करें।
एक समस्या है कि इंट्रोडक्शन खुद अगर बहुत प्रभावशाली हो जाता है तो उसमें फिर एक माइंडसेट तैयार हो जाता है। अब उस इंट्रोडक्शन के अनुपात अगर वक्ता जो है इतना प्रभावशाली ना हो तो फिर क्या करना चाहिए, यही थोड़ा मेरा विडंबना है। और थैंक यू nevertheless for such a eloquent and for such an eloquent introduction. It feels good, to get this introduction. I want to, at the outset, thank Principal Madam Krishna Sharma ji, Professor Abhay ji, and my young friend Dr. Jagannath Kashyap. Jagannath for, getting me out from somewhere and inviting me here. I'm extremely delighted and honored to be here. This college has a brand of its own. It has an identity of its own. And I have a number of elder friends and very good friends who are there sitting here, with whom an interaction has been continuous over the years, and with some of whom the interaction is on a daily basis. So I'm extremely happy to be here. मेरा सिर्फ एक है कि मैंने हिंदी में मैं बोल सकता हूं, पर आप लोगों का एक प्रकार का हिंदी सुनने का आदत है जो बीच बीच में बंगाल से सुनाई देता है हिंदी। तो उस हिंदी से तो मैं बेहतर बोलता हूं, पर मेरा हिंदी इतना क्लिष्ट या परिपक्व नहीं है। सो आई वुड सीक योर इंडल्जेंस कि मैं बोलूंगा इंग्लिश में। हालांकि मेरा संपूर्ण तरीके से डीकोलोनाइजेशन हुआ है। इट इज नॉट दैट आई एम नॉट कंप्लीटली डीकोलोनाइज्ड, but I'll also lapse into Hindi at times. Now, taking a cue from what Madam Principal said, it's very interesting. Normally, the impression is that the Constituent Assembly, the members of the Constituent Assembly were predominantly lawyers, legal luminaries. But I think it would be a very interesting exercise if one were to go into the list of teachers who were members of the Constituent Assembly. And you would perhaps know that Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was one of the youngest vice chancellors of the Calcutta University. He became vice chancellor at the age of 33. And it is a record which continues to be unbroken. His contribution to India's public life, his contribution to free India's political structure is as great as his contribution to the field of education. And even till the last year of his life, till 1952, the last convocation address that he delivered was to Delhi University. In those days, it was good that it did not matter. You could continue following your actual evocation, even though you were in public life. There was no bar or there was no difficulty to it. Please remember K.M. Munshi, the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, one of the tallest intellectuals perhaps that modern India has produced. K.M. Munshi was a student of Sri Aurobindo at Baroda. Sri Aurobindo himself was a teacher. He taught for 13 long years. He was a principal of Baroda College. He taught there, besides acting as secretary of the Gaikwad. K.M. Munshi, Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, a personality, I'll quote him, a personality like Dr. Raghuveera, whom we have forgotten, a great scholar, thinker, and a teacher, one of the greatest civilizational scholars, a polyglot, a polymath, a linguist, one of the uh, foremost scholars on Buddhism. He was a member of the Constituent Assembly. Therefore, I think it would be a very interesting exercise to undertake as to make a list of not lawyers, not legal luminaries, but teachers, academics who were members of the Constituent Assembly. And it goes without saying that teachers had a very important role. For example, I can just rattle off here Dr. Triguna Sen, who was India's education minister, vice chancellor of Banaras Hindu University, later on Jadavpur University. Professor Humayun Kabir, education and culture minister of India, one of the greatest, among the greatest educationists. So one can go on and really look at the role that teachers have played. Shikshak, अध्यापक, शिक्षक, चिंताविद, इन लोगों ने जो नींव रखा स्वाधीन भारत का, ये मुझे लगता है कि शोध हो सकता है. So I'll very briefly, I don't know, because you see, I'm not an expert, and I'm quite far removed from the academia, though I make it a point to regularly write and to read and to speak. But then, that reading, writing, and speaking is obviously not as deep as when you have to teach. So I'm not sure whether I'll make some sense, but there are certain things that I would like to share with you. Because you who are sitting here, I'm sure people must have told you, but this is something which I feel very strongly. You are the Amritkal generation, to echo Prime Minister Modi. And 2047, by then we would have all retired. Hopefully we would be active. Some of us would still be active physically and would not need a walker or a wheelchair. But in 2047, you will be in a very important position to define, to lead this country. इसलिए ये अमृतकाल पीढ़ी जो प्रधानमंत्री जी कहते हैं, ये सोचने वाला बात है. आप मानते हैं कि नहीं मानते हैं, वो आपके ऊपर है. जो लोग उसका मजाक उड़ाते हैं, उनका धर्म है, उनका डेमोक्रेटिक अधिकार है करना. पर ये अमृतकाल का पीढ़ी और विकसित भारत इन्होंने जोड़ दिया है. और हम जब संविधान का बात करते हैं तो हमारा कर्तव्य, हम कर्तव्य आधारित एक देश, हम कर्तव्य आधारित सभ्यता आज नहीं, अतीत में भी थे. और ये हमें डिफाइन किया फ्रॉम अदर सिविलाइजेशंस. We were not only a right-based civilization, we were a duty-oriented civilization. So it is not a new notion that is being introduced. It is a notion that we had identified with civilizationally, और इसलिए this generation and 2047, which is not very far away, it's just about little less than 25 years. And in that 25 years, how do you propose to not only prepare yourself? आप में से कोई कह सकता है यहां कर मार्गदर्शन दर्शन दे रहा है क्योंकि माइक मिल गया, मंच मिल गया तो मार्गदर्शन दे रहे हैं. पर सोचिए, I think we can reflect as to what the next 25 years, how do we define the next 25 years? How does India proceed in the next 25 years? How does India proceed in the next, थोड़ा एको हो रहा है, वॉल्यूम कम कर सकते क्या? बुलंद भारत की बुलंद आवाज है. In the next 25 years, and how do you see yourself in 2047? How old will you be? Where would you be? I think that is an exercise that is worth undertaking, because 2047 will be celebrating 100 years of our independence. And to look back at those people, that era and that age, when we became independent and we started establishing the foundations of a modern democracy. That is worth looking back and looking forward to. Now, 26 November 1946 was the day when the task of framing the constitution was completed. And therefore, in 2015, Prime Minister Modi announced 26th November as the Constitution Day. That was a day which was forgotten. We usually remember 26th January, but 26th November was important. That came back to us in 2015. And please remember that this is nothing new. This is not something which he suddenly conjured up as Prime Minister. वो जब गुजरात के मुख्यमंत्री थे उस समय भी when 60th year of the Indian Constitution was observed, Chief Minister Narendra Modi observed it in a grand way, and it was a giant replica of the Constitution was put on the back of an elephant called Airavat, and it marched across districts with thousands of intellectuals, academicians, journalists, eminent citizens, ministers, MLAs joining in. And in fact, the Hindu issue of January 24, 2010 says, Gujarat Chief Minister Narendra Modi flagged off a procession of a giant replica of the Constitution in front of the statue of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to celebrate the 60th anniversary of its adoption here on Sunday, 24th January. So तब से ये उनके मन में ये था. And I think therefore 26th November, the Constitution Day and Constitution, and when we are celebrating, observing 75 years of the Republic, it gives us an opportunity to look back, to look at the present, and to chart out a roadmap for the future. It is a constitution which is extremely dynamic. It is a constitution which is flexible. And as Abhayji very rightly said, it is a unique exercise in the history of mankind. This constitution framing was a unique exercise, and I challenge any other country had such an elaborate exercise with so many thought leaders participating in it. It was unprecedented in the history of independent India. I'll go through very fast through a few points. How much time do I have? I mean, you can, but you can stop me. If you start feeling it's too heavy, I'll stop. Because obviously the person who's on this side of the mic feels very good, keeps hearing his voice. But but obviously the challenge is for those who are listening to him. So somewhere maybe we should stop also. Now I just wanted to quickly go through certain points. As I said that. So let us remember that there was a legacy of protecting the values of the Constitution also. And in fact, the name after which my organization is named, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Foundation. Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was a member of the Constituent Assembly. He was Free India's first industry and supply minister. He became minister at the age of 45. And you would know that the first struggle to preserve the Constitution and to ensure that the fruits of the Constitution were equally available to every citizen of India was the struggle in Kashmir and the abrogation of 370. Let us look at it this way. It has been projected as if it was a communal demand. It was more than that. It was, last of it was a communal demand, if at all one could say that. The principal argument was that the Constitution of India must be applicable across India to everyone. The benefits of the Constitution must be available to all citizens of India. Why should it be denied to a certain section? Why should it be denied to a certain geographical region of India? You may please read the debate in the interim in first Lok Sabha, August 7th, 1952. And Shyama Prasad Mukherjee says, may I ask, and he's asking Sheikh Abdullah, and I quote, Sheikh Abdullah was the chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir who wanted to be prime minister of Jammu and Kashmir. So he had a very simple question for Sheikh Abdullah. He says, he was a member of the Constituent Assembly. But today he is asking for special treatment. Did he not agree to accept this constitution in relation to the rest of India, including 497 states? If it is good enough for all of them, why should it not be good enough for him in Kashmir? This was the basic question. This was the basic question. And he says, the question of the flag. So I'm drawing these points because as soon as the republic was established, there were challenges to the republic. In the last 75 years, this republic has seen number of challenges. And each of these challenges were addressed. And each of these challenges were met with. The first challenge to this republic, and I'm leaving aside the partition, I'm leaving aside the movement of refugees because that is a subject on its own. But the first challenge was this integration of India, one nation, one constitution. This was the demand that was made. You pass a law in parliament, you say it is applicable all across the country except Jammu and Kashmir. Why? Even members of parliament from Jammu and Kashmir, please look at the debate that took place in 1964 in the Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha debated for 3 months, abrogation of Article 370. Congress members of parliament supported it. Left members of parliament supported the abrogation. And members of parliament from J&K said, we feel very bad that it is, you pass a law, you say it is applicable all across India except Jammu and Kashmir. And regarding the flag, you know that till the other day, till 2019, 5th August, the state of Jammu and Kashmir had a separate flag, the only state to have a separate flag. And 2 flags were flown for years, for decades. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and those who supported him, who supported the demand, just said that there should be only one flag. And that is the flag of free India. वो तिरंगा होना चाहिए और कोई झंडा हम नहीं फहरा सकते हैं. So his question was, there's the question of the flag. And in course of the debate, 26 June 1952, in the Lok Sabha, you may please read that debate. It's an extremely forceful intervention from all sides. In course of that debate, Sheikh Abdullah says that, we will also use the Indian flag. We will also unfurl the Indian flag. And Shyama Prasad Mukherjee says that the other day, 2 days ago, Sheikh Abdullah said, of course, we will recognize the Union flag. There is no question of his recognizing the Union flag. The Union flag is there. The Union flag is there in spite of anybody. And that is the flag of free India. Sheikh Abdullah has said, and this is in quotes, Sheikh Abdullah has said, we will treat both flags equally. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee says, you cannot do it. It is not a question of 50-50. It is not a question of parity. It is a question of using one flag for the whole of India, India that includes Kashmir. There is no question of having a separate Republic of Kashmir, having a separate flag. It is not a small matter. Let them keep the flag for the national conference in Kashmir. No one objects to it. But when you work as government, no matter where you function, only one flag can fly and will fly, and that is the flag of a free country, of free India. I don't know whether you sent anything communal in this, or whoever has sent it, I don't at least. I may be biased, but so I think this, I just brought this to your notice because this was the first fundamental challenge to the concept, to the vision of the Republic. This was the first fundamental challenge to the essence, to the spirit of the Constitution. You say that there will be 2 flags. You say that there will be 2 chiefs, 2 prime ministers. And then he goes on to say, you say there will be 2 parliaments. There can be only one parliament, and that is the Parliament of Free India. So today, when we look back and we see one constitution, one nation, I think it is a tribute to that struggle. It is a recognition of that struggle. And it is the enabling of the fruits of constitution to be equally spread amongst all citizens of India. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar had told Sheikh Abdullah, Dr. Ambedkar, Baba Sahib had a very, very simple comment. He said, you want that India should protect your borders, it should build roads in your territory, it should supply you with grain, and Kashmir should be given the same status as India. But the government of India should only have limited powers, and the Indian people should have no rights in Kashmir. So as we look through, we see that a number of these, I think it would be also worthwhile to make a list of the various challenges that appeared before India just after the constitution was adopted. Now, friends, I think we are all very used to obviously listening and knowing Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech. But please look up the Constituent Assembly debates, and you'll see on 14th August 9th, 1947, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, one of the greatest teachers on whom Teachers' Day is celebrated and commemorated, who was also a member of the Constituent Assembly, later on to become President of India. Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan said something very interesting in his speech. And I think this is a speech we ought to also remember. He said, from tomorrow morning, from midnight today, we cannot throw the blame on the Britishers because we are getting free. We have to assume the responsibility ourselves for what we do. A free India will be judged by the way in which it will serve the interests of the common man in the matter of food, clothing, shelter, and social service. And he says that when power outstrips ability, we fall on evil days. So I think this is also, yes, a tryst with destiny long years ago, and that entire speech is also very inspiring. But let us also remember this. This is a speech which is kartavya oriented, which is duty oriented. Don't blame our colonizers anymore. From midnight today, it is us. We assume responsibility for ourselves, implying that it is we who are to be blamed or we who are to be applauded. And please make sure that you send people, you elect people who have ability as well in positions of power. And the basic duties of a free nation under a constitution is this: empowering of the most marginalized. And you quoted Dr. Ambedkar. Yes, very true. While moving the constitution, placing it to the house, he said this constitution is workable, it is flexible, and it is strong enough to hold the country together both in peacetime and in wartime. Indeed, I may say so. If things go wrong under the new constitution, the reason will not be that we had a bad constitution. What will we have to say is that man was vile, that we have not been able to operate it. The constitution is fine. It is flexible. It is resilient. It is reflective of the aspirations of a free country. But if we are unable to work it, it is we who are to be blamed. These are certain fundamental thoughts, emotions that many express themselves. And you know that Baba Saheb completely, in fact, ruined his health. He would work 18, 20 hours a day, completely ruined his health by putting this constitution together. And in fact, in a letter he writes that I have not had a wink of sleep. I am taking insulin as well as homeopathic medicine. Neither seems to give me relief. I must now learn to endure what appears to be beyond cure. He did not think about himself, about his health. It was only one focus, and he took it up as a mission. I think that was the final mission, historic mission in his life, the framing of the Indian Constitution. And for that, everything could be sacrificed, even his life. Even his life, literally sacrificed his life. And you would also know that I think there is no parallel in the history of any country that the framer of the Constitution was defeated. In 1952, those who did not agree with him in the first general election ensured that Baba Saheb Ambedkar loses the election. And even in 1954, when there was a by-election, there was a possibility of him getting elected to the Lok Sabha, he was again defeated because of those who did not agree to his politics. There was no largeness of heart. In fact, he could have been re-invited to parliament as a sculpture of the constitution with due honor, but that did not happen. The divisiveness was apparent in the defeat of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and there was a lot of vicarious pleasure in his loss, in his electoral loss. Now, friends, I come to one more point which I would just like to touch upon. You would have realized that in G20, one of the themes of G20 was India as the mother of democracy. So when we are celebrating 75 years of the Constitution, we must also remember that I think we are one of those few civilizations which have not only survived, but which have had a tradition, a discipline, a texture of being democratic, of being the cradle of many a democratic experiment. And there are testimonies that abound. Many scholars, many travelers, especially the European, the Western traveler, because sometimes we have such a mindset. Some have a mindset that if it is a Western testimony, it is more credible rather than an Indian testimony. So you have Western travelers who actually explorers, writers who were there on the ground. And I'll just name one. Pierre Sonora was a French traveler. In his book, Voyage aux Indes Orientales, 1782, he traveled extensively in India. And these books are available for those who have the habit of going archive.org, etc. Please, you can find these books, they're still there. And he was convinced that India was nothing less than the cradle of humanity. And he writes there, and I quote him, l'Inde dans sa splendeur donna des religions et des lois à tous les autres peuples. L'Égypte et la Grèce lui durent à la fois leur fable et leur sagesse. Means India, Greece, Egypt, all these countries with a civilization, I am convinced, owed India not only her legends and her tales, but her sagesse, in the sense her wisdom as well. So there are a number of Danish traveler called Carsten Niebuhr, in one of his books in 1779, he compares Indian architecture, he compares the Elephanta caves and says that, look, anyone who has made these caves belonged to a civilization which was far more advanced than the civilizations of Greece and Egypt. And then they go on to support their thesis. So therefore, India as the mother of democracy is not something that we need to, that perhaps we are discovering now, but the ancient world had glimpses of it. Sri Aurobindo, in his famous The Renaissance in India, he speaks of the legend of Indian political incompetence as having arisen from a false view of historical development. Sri Aurobindo says that, some of these Western writers would also say that, in India, you did not have a structure, you did not have a structure of governance. So it was mostly, the Indians were mostly esoteric civilization, in the sense they were primarily concerned with religion, etc., etc. But he says that is not true, because that's a partial reading of Indian culture. I mean, if you look at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, by the time, because when Sri Aurobindo wrote this, Harappa had not been discovered, the Indus civilization had not been discovered. You just look at the drainage system. You look at the 3-4 stories houses that they had. So it was a civilization which was very advanced, materially as well, which was conscious. I mean, you can't have a drainage and a garbage disposal system if you did not have a certain degree of advancement. It was this level that was there in the past. So I think Sri Aurobindo says that there was a strong democratic element in Indian polity, and even institutions that present a certain analogy to the parliamentary form. There was a very strong democratic element in Indian polity in the past. So, one can just go on. I also wanted to remember here Hansa Mehta, member of the Constituent Assembly. And you would remember, and especially when we are talking about women-led development. Hansa Mehta was a freedom fighter, member of the Constituent Assembly, a Gandhian. She was one of the foremost social worker, educationist as well. And when the United Nations Commission on Human Rights was drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, do you know that incident? Are you aware? Somebody here? Somebody can tell me about Hansa Mehta and why it is unique? What was different and why we should remember her when we are celebrating 75 years of the Constitution? And why when we say India as mother of democracy, she is a very important person. Can anyone say? Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What does the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says? What does it say? All human beings are born free and equal. Free and equal. This is her contribution, because initially the draft was all men are born free and equal, and she protested. She said, no, it is a division of equality. It is a blocking. So let us make it all human beings are born free and equal. And this was India's contribution. This was her contribution. This was Hansa Mehta's contribution. And this reflected the mindset, the democratic element that Sri Aurobindo speaks about. And you would also know that she was a very strong proponent of the Uniform Civil Code. In 1949, 22nd November, she says that we have too many personal laws in this country, and these personal laws are dividing the nation today. It is therefore very essential, if we want to build up one nation, to have one civil code. So when we are debating the UCC, when we are debating one nation, one election, I think we should also look in the past and not get bogged down by partisanship. Because Hansa Mehta, people like her, and there were many others who supported, including Dr. Ambedkar, who felt that there should be one civil code and not, there should be one uniform civil code and not too many personal laws. When we talk about India as mother of democracy, I don't know, it's because I grew up in the South. I spent many years in the South. Next time, perhaps some of you may have visited. If you have not, I would urge you to visit next time you go to Mahabalipuram or you go to Chennai, or from Chennai you are passing on to Mahabalipuram. Please visit Uttaramerur in the Kanchipuram district. You would have known that when we say India is the mother of democracy, it's not just a theory. It is not a theoretical construct. 1100 years ago, during the Chola reign, and these inscriptions are there, it's just 90 kilometers away from Chennai. A village assembly and its constitution. And what a phenomenal, fascinating reading these inscriptions make. It had a highly refined electoral system, a written constitution which prescribed a model of election. And there were astonishing details. How would transportation be managed? How would lakes be irrigated? How would judiciary function? How would the commercial and agricultural departments function in the village? And more importantly, this constitution under the Chola Raja, Parantaka Chola was there at the time. You know, Rajendra Chola, Raja Chola, they had a huge empire. But this example, and it says that there was a right to recall your elected representative. You could recall your elected representative. And an elected representative could be debarred from contesting elections among such and such criteria. The first criteria was that having been elected to one of the public committees, if did not render proper accounts at the end of a year, was disqualified from standing for the election throughout his life. So I think this was a very complex system. I mean, this is Uttaramerur inscriptions. You can Google and see. Dr. Nagaswamy, late Dr. Nagaswamy, one of the greatest archaeologists, epigraphists of Tamil Nadu, has done extensive work on the Uttaramerur inscriptions. And he says that one who misappropriate any property was also disqualified. And the disqualifications were far more severe. I think this was very interesting. And not only that elected representative was dismissed, his family members also could not stand for elections for the next 3 terms. and he would be permanently debarred. And you had to be above 35 to stand for elections and below 70, not above 70. Above 70 is then you would have to retire. So these were certain things which have come out. And for example, not only in the Chola literature, but you even have in the Buddhist literature, the Avadanas. The Buddhist literature, the Avadanas were basically, like Jataka tales, stories which encouraged people to lead a life of Sadharma. And there, the Avadanas say very clearly, it puts forward an ideal. And it says that this ideal will be there, and I'm not reading it out in Sanskrit, but it's there. And it reads, it says that Dharmiko Dharma Raja Dharma Rajyam Karayati. So what is Dharma? What is a dharmic ruler? It is not a religious ruler. In fact, Dindayal Upadhyaya says that when we talk about Dharma Rajya, it is a non-theocratic state. It is not a religious state. What was Dharma? And how did a ruler inspired and driven by Dharma behave? And our scholars say, this was the ideal. Obviously, there were always exceptions. You didn't have an utopian system. But this ideal was always there in front of people. It was there in front of the rulers. And they had to strive to live up to that ideal. And I think, therefore, when we say India is mother of democracy, there's a lot that is established. We just need to go back to it and see how that was and how did it evolve a very complex civilization. Now, for I don't know if a majority are here, are girls here, majority. Would you know? I thought a very interesting point I wanted to make, and I feel very proud about it. There were 5 women artists who drew the calligraphic illustrations in the original copy of the Constitution. And you know that a group of 22 artists, that also can be an area of study. Please study the illustrations of the Constitution. What did they try to radiate? What did they try to explain? Why were these illustrations put in the first place? And you know that Acharya Nandalal Bose, who was one of the greatest, who was one of the leaders of the Bengal art school, who was the principal of Kala Bhavan, specially established by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore in Shantiniketan, Bolpur. And you had 5 women who were artists. And if you go to the original copy of the Constitution, you'll see their addresses there. So you had, and we have forgotten them. I think there can be an exhibition commemorating these artists. And obviously, I mean, I'm being a little biased. I'm extremely happy to say that they were all Bengalis. And they were all from Shantiniketan, from Bolpur, with which I have a very close link. So these artists, for example, Gauri Bhanja, Jamuna Sen, Nibedita Bose, Amala Sharkar, Bani Patel, 5 of them. They were Nandalal Bose's daughters, elder daughters, youngest daughter, his granddaughter. But this was not a family affair because all of them were established artists. All of them were selected by Tagore to be part of the Kala Bhavan in Shantiniketan. And Nandalal Bose himself was selected by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose in 1938 to illustrate and put together the Congress Pandal in Haripura, of which Netaji was the president. And Netaji put together this group of artists. And even from before that and even after that, they continued to illustrate the pandals of the Congress wherever the Congress sessions took place. So I think this is a very interesting, point that I came across. I thought I should share with you. And the youngest granddaughter of Nandalal Bose was 21 years old, Bani Patel. And she also was one of the artists. And in the directive principles of state policy, the illustration, if you see, you'll see her signature there. So I think and all of them in their own right established art movements, trends, artistic trends in their lifetime and made a huge contribution to free India. In fact, they even designed tableaus for the Republic Day later on. So these are personalities that we need to remember as we also commemorate 75 years of the Constitution. I came across a very interesting point. For example, minority rights, reservations, electoral reservations. There was a lot of debate, in the Constituent Assembly. Intense debate took place whether Free India should have reservations for minorities. Maulana Azad was for reservation for minorities. Dr. Ambedkar was not. He said we should give reservation for those who are backward, who are marginalized, and who have been discriminated. And very interesting, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, who was herself a Christian, she said reservation of seats and weightage based on religion or sect would lead to fragmentation of the union. She opposed. And a very interesting personality, member of the Constituent Assembly, Begum Aizaz Rasool from Lucknow. She was a Muslim leaguer in pre-partition days. Somehow she chose to stay back in India. She didn't go to Pakistan. In course of the debate, when Sardar Patel asked her, what is your opinion? She said, the Muslims left behind in India were an integral part of the nation and needed no safeguards. So I think, a number of such personalities came up. It is like, जो कहते हैं ना मंथन चल रहा है और उस मंथन में एक एक उभर के आ रहे हैं और उनका रोल प्ले करके फिर से इतिहास के पन्ने में वो लोग निकल जा रहे हैं. It was a very interesting exercise. Please also let us remember that it was not only one party, one leader who established the democratic structure of Free India. Many leaders contributed to it. Normally, some are in the habit of saying it was only one leader for 50 years, one party for 50 years, which established the democratic structure of India, the quintessential Democrat. And Nehru, the quintessential Democrat during the first general elections. When Shyama Prasad Mukherjee was campaigning for the Janasangh, Nehru had declared openly that I shall crush Janasangh. And Shyama Prasad Mukherjee had replied to that, I say I will crush that crushing mentality, because that crushing mentality has no place in a free democratic country. So the role of the opposition was equally important in setting and establishing the democratic fabric in the early years of the Republic. And they represented a diverse social group. The opposition parties came from a diverse social group, and they played a vital role in establishing the political order and in pressurizing the government, in censuring it, mass mobilization at grassroots. Please remember that Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee as leader of the Janasangh was the undeclared leader of opposition. And Hiren Mukherjee, CPI leader for 25 years, a teacher himself who was a member of the Constituent, first elected in 1952 from North Kolkata and continued uninterrupted from till 1977, writes, the opposition numerically at bay made up for the deficiency more often than not with a forensic flair which the government party could not quite match. Leading lights of the opposition were Rajagopalachari ji, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, each representing, just imagine, close your eyes for a while and just remember them. Just see, each one representing, each one an icon, each one representing a certain section, a certain group, a certain ideal, a certain ideology. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, peasant leader, Krishak Neta, M.G. Ranga, who later on became one of the founders of the Swatantra Party. And K. Munshi, Gujarati intellectual, institution builder, a prominent framer of the constitution, K. Munshi. Acharya Kriplani and Sucheta Kriplani also. Sucheta Kriplani, I think one of the most understudied, underrated leader. The first woman chief minister of Uttar Pradesh and the first Bengali chief minister of Uttar Pradesh also is something which is unthinkable now. Obviously, I mean, there's no point that I'm trying to make. But Sucheta Kriplani, Minu Masani, Jay Prakash Narayan, Hiren Mukherjee, Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, all of them, and I have just named a few, they constituted the opposition. All of them were in the freedom struggle, most of them. They were members of the Constituent Assembly. And then they sat in the opposition. So one cannot doubt their commitment to a free India, to a democratic India. So please let us remember, and the combined opposition vote in 1952 first general election mein, combined opposition vote was collectively more votes that the Congress polled, and it was 56.1%, the combined opposition vote. So this opposition had a voice. It had a certain duty. And this combined opposition vote was more than the ruling party. It's not anything which is somebody has suddenly discovered. It was there. Now I just very briefly I'll just now start concluding, because certain interesting phases in the first few years of the Republic. Please read up and remember the First Amendment. The First Amendment came within 15 months of adopting the Constitution in 1951. Sardar Patel was not there. He had passed away in December 1950, 10 December 1950. It was an interim parliament. The first general elections had not been held. And Panditji felt that his authority as Prime Minister was being challenged. And Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the Organizer Weekly, and a number of other weeklies had made a demand at that time that if Pakistan cannot protect its minorities, then Pakistan must cede land where these minorities could be settled in full security. Panditji felt that whatever he wanted to push through was being hemmed in by the Supreme Court and by the opposition. And therefore, he wanted to ram through the First Amendment bill. It was curtailing of free speech and freedom of expression. But very interesting, the interesting part is, please read the debate. It is, I think, one of the fascinating debates. Not many talk of it. But please read the First Amendment debate, because the question is, where was the haste? It was just 15 months that we had given unto ourselves the Constitution. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, in his intervention in Parliament, please read that speech, please read his intervention, because he was one of the principal speakers. And it is said that when he completed his speech in Parliament, even the Treasury benches started thumping. He says that the First Amendment to the American Constitution came after 3 years. Why do you feel that you want to bring it in 15 months? He says, why this indecent haste? And when you look at the entire period, 16 days that its entire debate took place, this entire discussion took place, there were Congress MPs, 77 Congress MPs signed a petition and gave it to Panditji, saying that when the discussion on First Amendment takes place in Parliament, please allow us a free vote. So Panditji realized that there was a possibility that his own MPs may defeat his amendment. And so he brought in the clause reasonable restriction. That was brought under pressure from his own MPs. And it was not only Shyama Prasad Mukherjee who opposed this, the First Amendment. If you look at the galaxy of leaders who opposed it, M.R. Jayakar, Acharya Kriplani, Jayaprakash Narayan, a socialist like H.V. Kamath, Shyamnandan Sahai, M.C. Chagla, jurists like Prannath Mehta, all of them came together to oppose the First Amendment. And it is very interesting that Nehru, the Democrat, was wanting to pass the First Amendment, and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, the communal, and the organizer, the communal, was opposing First Amendment. In his speech, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee makes a very interesting point. He asks a very fundamental question. And I think if you had seen Prime Minister's reply to the Constitution debate in the Lok Sabha, he started off with this first point. मैं थोड़ा break लूं क्या? थोड़ा break? मैं नहीं, आपके लिए थोड़ा break. Should I take a break? लेते हैं थोड़ा, the 2 minutes, and then maybe in 5 minutes we can conclude. So he says that why this hurry? Why this hurry to amend the constitution? We spent nearly 4 years drafting and framing the constitution. We spent nearly 4 years to frame this constitution. It was not hurriedly done. Take this chapter on fundamental rights. A special committee was appointed, which the Prime Minister himself was the chairman. How many months, how many years did we not take to weigh every single paragraph, every single sentence, every single word of that chapter? How many changes did we make at various stages of the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly? And we were criticized by the people. People said that we are very slow. We were taking too long a time. But he tells Nehru, but we justified this delay because we were anxious that nothing should be done hastily or on the spur of the moment. We were doing something that was we were doing something that was unique in the annals of this country, something indeed to which there are not many parallels in the entire civilized world. The country had attained political freedom, and within a few months of attaining it, it set itself to the task of writing a constitution. So we had to be responsive to all shades of opinion. We had to clarify every point that came. So we undertook this massive exercise. So why this indecent haste to change a constitution? Why do you want to curtail? Give it a chance. Why do you want to clamp down on free speech and freedom of expression? He says, this encroachment on the liberty of the people of free India is the saddest epitaph which can be carved in memory of vanished liberty, is that it was lost because its possessors failed to stretch forth a saving hand while yet there was time. So the First Amendment debate was a very interesting, important debate. It is from the first that started. And having worked on a constitution for 4 years, some people felt that it had to be amended within 15 months. This was one point. Please remember, in December 1952, Sri Ramulu fasted unto death, demanding a separate state. There was no response. And the Prime Minister's response was that I'm not going to get cowed down to these things. And Sri Ramulu himself was a freedom fighter. He was a congressman. He fasted unto death. That was the first time in free India that an activist, a satyagrahi, fasted unto death and died because he demanded a separate state for his people. This was in December 1952. In June 1953, the undeclared leader of opposition of India, of the first Lok Sabha, died in detention in Kashmir. He was detained for 40 days. And very interesting, when the First Amendment debate took place, at the same time, preventive detention debate also took place. And within a year of that debate, Shama Prasad Mukherjee died in detention in Kashmir. This also was a challenge. That you have a member of the Constituent Assembly, former Union Minister, a sitting member of Parliament of the Lok Sabha, dying in detention after 40 days. A stalwart like him. Then you had a spate of resignation. Dr. Shama Prasad Mukherjee resigned in April 1950. John Mathai, the second finance minister, first railway minister of India, resigned from the Nehru cabinet in August 1950. Babasaheb Ambedkar resigned from the Nehru cabinet in August 1951. So these are questions also. That some of the stalwarts who were framers of the constitution also resigned from the first cabinet. So I think when we are discussing the resilience of our polity, these are aspects also that we need to keep in mind. There was some very other interesting, I came across a very interesting, my latest column is on that. I came across a very interesting bill in 1956, since the Mahakumbh is going on. I thought I'll share it with you. You know, to have the flavor of parliament, to have flavor of the first parliament, the first 10 years, when parliament was setting itself up. So in 1956, you have a Congress member of parliament. introducing a bill in parliament, the sadhu and sannyasis registration bill. So it was that all sadhus and sannyasis had to register themselves. If you had certain realization and you felt you wanted to be a sadhu, you could not be. You had to first go to the district magistrate. You had to tell him that, look, sir, I want to be a sadhu. I am feeling this. So the district magistrate would look at you and decide whether you are fit to be a sadhu or not. He would then issue a license. Then you would have to be registered as a sadhu, and that license would be valid for 10 years. If you did not conduct yourself well in a dharmic way, then the district magistrate would have the power to cancel your registration, fine you 500 rupees, or put you in jail for 2 years. Amazing. You see, this is the fascinating dimension of our democracy, that a member of parliament very close to Panditji introduced this bill. And what was the objective? Every bill has an objective, isn't it? As they say, statement of objects and reasons. And look at the statement. In our country, and this is placed in parliament, in our country, the number of sadhus and sannyasis is increasing day by day. And see, he thought that was a problem. In the guise of saintly order, most of them, generalization, most of them indulge in vices, begging and other antisocial acts, which is undesirable and which, if not checked, will help the crime incidents to increase unabated. So Lok Sabha debated the sadhu registration bill, and it's a very fascinating debate. Please go through it. In August 1957, it debated. There was a very interesting member of Lok Sabha from Sambalpur, Shraddhakar Supakar. He was known as Sahitya Acharya. Madam referred to teachers. Himself was a teacher. He was also a member of the Constituent Assembly, and he was earlier a leader of opposition in the Odisha Assembly. He belonged to the Ganatantra Parishad. It was a party which was primarily supported by the tribals. Please read his intervention. Such a fascinating intervention. You know, these were thinking minds. They said, he said that I am opposing this bill because it seeks to scrutinize our social life to the extreme limit. I mean, sadhus have played a role in this civilization. They have upheld our societies. How can you generalize? There may be some black sheep, he said, but you can't generalize. You can't insinuate that all sadhus are thieves, all sadhus are bandits and dacoits. He said, if you pass this bill, then why don't you pass a bill that all pickpockets also must register? All thieves must register. They must also register, if that is the logic. And then at the end he says that, you want only sarkari sadhus. You are asking them to register because you want a sarkari sadhus. Does the district magistrate have an antardrishti that he will see who can be a sadhu and not be a sadhu? And then at the end he says, can you imagine? He told Lok Sabha, can you imagine if Shankara were living today, if Buddha were living today, if Upagupta, who made Ashoka into a great man and brought him into the picture of history, were living today, if Aurobindo were living today, if Swami Vivekananda were living today, would they have come to a court of law, to a district magistrate, and requested him, sir, my conduct is good. I want a good conduct certificate from you saying that I am worthy to be called a sadhu or sannyasi? They may not be there, but I believe that equally great people who are worthy to be successors of these great men are still living in India today. Shall we compel them to get themselves registered under the penalty of paying a fine? So one can pick up a number of such historic debates. The 1962, the China debates that took place in Lok Sabha and in Rajya Sabha. And I think this is the most important part of our of the constitution, of our parliamentary democracy, of our constitutional democracy when we look at it. You would also know and also remember, I think, sir, if a copy can be made available here, or I can organize to send a copy for the library. Emergency was clamped. We are of the emergency generation. We belong to the emergency generation. We were born during emergency or just a little before and in the midst of emergency. But for many of you, emergency is just a page in history or a paragraph. you have an illustrious former faculty of this very college who was brutally tortured during emergency, who was made to stand and flogged for days on end during emergency. I have to conclude. Okay. So I have to conclude. Now it's very interesting that the Shah Commission report had completely disappeared. And a member of parliament from the DMK later on became a member of parliament from Janata Party, Era Shazian, who tracked, and he found copies of it in the Australian National University and the SOAS at London. And these copies were brought back and reprinted. This was only possible, it only happened, you had both ways. You had an entire commission report being obliterated, and you had a member of parliament going out of his way, rediscovering it, bringing it back and reinstating it here, because he felt that both sides must be known, must be studied. So I would only urge you to take up studies in these dimensions. You can discover the Constitution in your own way. You can discover the dimensions of our parliamentary democracy in your own way. You can explore and discover, but do explore and discover. Formation of opinion without undertaking that fundamental exercise is something which in itself is undemocratic, non-democratic, and non-constitutional. I think this gives us a wonderful opportunity to take up that task. Large number of figures have been forgotten. Let us rediscover them. Let us give them their due. Let us bring them back into our discourse. Our history, constitutional history, the history of our parliamentary democracy is rich, but it is by design that some have been marginalized. It is by a deliberate purpose and exercise that some were made to be forgotten. While we discuss Know Your Republic and Samvaad, it is an essential characteristics of Samvaad to know all sides of the reality. It is an essential characteristics of Samvaad to evaluate facts, all facts, and then arrive at a conclusion, whatever that may be. And it is our responsibility, kartavya, to try and place those facts before you so that it ignites a journey of exploration and discovery. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm extremely was that loud clap? Was that loud clap meant that good? That I finally concluded. I think it was. Thank you so much for being so patient, and I'm sorry that I overshot, but I think 60 minutes is okay. No, you are habituated to a 60 minutes class. I thought initially I'll talk for half an hour, but I think 60 minutes was okay. Thank you so much.
धन्यवाद।